The Women in Media podcast is proudly sponsored by Organic Traditions for spring 2024. Stay tuned for a special deal during this episode. I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. On the show today, I have an award-winning author and broadcaster. She is best known for her work with Discovery's flagship science show, Daily Planet. You've probably read her best-selling book, The Reality Bubble. And she's just made her directorial debut with the new documentary, Plastic People. Please welcome Ziya Tong. How are you?
Sarah, it's so good to be with you. Thank you for having me here.
I mean, I think it was about a year ago. We had you on the Jan Arden podcast, and I know you're going to be on that podcast too. But you were sort of leaving us these little nuggets about a documentary that you were working on that you were so excited about. And here we are a year later, premiered at South by Southwest. How did that go?
That was incredible. And as you said, I'm a first-time filmmaker, so I'd never been to South by before. And, just really exciting. It's a little bit different than TV. And as you know, I've been doing TV for about 20 years because you create this baby. It takes about 9 months to a year, right? Exactly the same sort of gestation. Except mine is a plastic baby, as you've seen probably from the posters, a little scarier.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really fun. The reception was sold out screenings, and I'm here in Vancouver now, and we're right about to have our Canadian premiere, and then we're going to be in Toronto for our Toronto launch.
So for anyone who wants to check out a premiere who hears this in time, I will have some information in the show notes. But let me just give you a quick rundown of what Plastic People is about, and then we can dig in. So it's being called a groundbreaking feature documentary that chronicles one woman's mission to expose shocking new revelations about the impact of microplastics on human health. Now, if you know Ziya, you've been following her career, the Daily Planet, the Reality Bubble, science behind everything that you do. What made you want to research at this great length the impact of microplastics in human health?
Well, I think the threat is the same threat that we're facing with the climate crisis and the environmental crisis, right? If you think about it, big oil has been doing us dirty for some time. But the problem is we can never see the actual threat, right? Like we know that when it comes to the climate crisis, all those emissions that are coming out of our tailpipes and out of our buildings, they are invisible to the naked eye. So huge problem, invisible. And then in this instance with microplastics, it's the same thing. You and I are breathing them in right now, invisible. In fact, as you know, when I wrote The Reality Bubble, it was all about these invisible threats that constantly surround us. How can we see them? So one of the things that I started thinking about was the fact that, when people see oil spills, they freak out. They're like, oh my God, I remember when the BP oil spill took place, I went there, people were washing the birds and we had a chance to swim under it. When you see a threat, you act. And so we wanted to show people what an oil spill looks like inside of the human body, because that's exactly what it is. Oil and gas is what you make plastic with, and all that plastic is now really infiltrating our systems to a degree that's shocking.
Yeah. Now, was there a moment where you were like, okay, this isn't another book. This needs to involve my body, my research. How did you make the decision of how to do this?
Well, I was actually approached by my friend now, Rick Smith. I had interviewed him years ago on Daily Planet when he came out with a book called Slow Death by Rubber Duck. It's just a fantastic read where he was testing his own body for a whole bunch of stuff and finding all these toxic chemicals in our everyday products. And so he wrote a great article in the Globe and Mail, and White Pine Pictures, the president, Peter Raymond, contacted him, said, hey, why don't we do a documentary about it? Rick and I had just finished doing a panel on plastics together. And he was like, Ziya, why don't you, are you interested in maybe fronting this and directing this and also putting your own body on the line? And I thought, why not? Why not? He's like, you get to test your own poo on camera. I'm like, well, that sounds super glamorous.
I'm in.
So I was like, and at least, in the editing room, you're like, please edit that out. Oh my God. Yeah. But, you see what you see. It is what it is.
I'm sure the entire process was completely mind-boggling, but what was one of the most shocking findings, even for someone who's right into environmental science?
Gosh. Well, there's some stuff that I'm going to leave as a teaser for people who watch. But I mean, we traveled all the way to Turkey to meet with researchers, and we actually filmed them doing a brain surgery. So I'm going to dot that for folks to watch. The one thing I will say is one of the crazy things is what's kind of not included in the film.
Okay.
And that is how much plastic is actually still in my body. When you go and get yourself tested, like I got my blood tested, when you get your feces tested, you're looking at what comes out of your body, right? Like tiny, and we're taking tiny samples, like, a teaspoon of poo.
From your body systems.
Totally, yeah. And with the blood, it's only 2.5 milliliters, like a drop of blood. But what they're finding in that tiny sample, few drops of blood, okay, 2.5 milliliters, is about 11 microplastic particles on average. So, okay, you think about it. You got 5 liters of blood in your body. Like, how much microplastic? Like, when I started just doing that, napkin math, I was like, holy, that is a lot of microplastic coursing through us. I mean, I'm glad a bunch of it comes out, but like, how much is staying in? And then you start to think about people who have like IBS, for example. Growing up, you started to see people who were getting, inflammatory bowel problems. Well, guess what? A lot of that is related. People who have more microplastics in their body have a higher rate of this stuff going on. And that's because, normally when you have bacteria in your body, your white blood cells will come and, have a little tussle and a little fight and break them down, but they can't break down microplastics. And so that just causes a level of inflammation that continues on and on and on, right? So that's why you get that constant inflammatory problem.
I also want to know what new challenges you faced. In media roles, I'm sure you're quite comfortable, but there's a new pressure when you're a director as well.
I'm a newbie. I'm such a noob. But it's been really funny. And it's funny because I guess people ask you slightly different questions. Like, it's always been weird because as I've been wearing a few different hats. I'm so used to being in your role and asking the questions. The great thing as a director, you still get to ask those questions. I still get to interview people. So I love that. But it is it's a little odd. I'm just getting used to that hat. I didn't get a tear that said director on it. No, come on next.
I'm mad for you.
No, you don't do that on the dogs. But yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. You get to work with crews and things like selecting animation and just a different and a longer story that you're telling. And of course, Ben Addelman is the director that I worked with. So I learned a lot from him. And I'm hoping to get a few other shots at this. I've been approached to work on a couple other movies now. So yeah, so it's a new thing, but it's really unexpected and super weird. So just be gentle. This is my first one, and we'll see how it takes me in the future.
Would you share like a lesson learned, whether it was from Ben, the crew, just something, new to your role as a director?
A lesson learned. Well, you really got to follow the puck. Because one of the things that was happening is, unlike on Daily Planet, where we had a show that aired every single day at 7 p.m., in this instance, you're chasing a story for a year. So if the news changes, and of course the news changes over a year and the science breaks while it's happening, well, you're like, oh God, the story's got to change now.
Right.
So that's exactly what happened when we went to Turkey. And it was like, okay, we've got these brain researchers who are doing groundbreaking research. Nobody's ever seen what they're doing before. We have to go to Turkey. And it's like, we don't have a budget. We don't have a budget to go to Turkey. This was not in the script. What the heck is going on? Or, in the treatment. And so then you have to go up to, saddle up to your executive producers and be like, you need to send us to Turkey.
This is not for a luxury vacation. We need to see the brain surgery.
Yeah, exactly. And so luckily we had a great team, and our executive producers were like, okay, I guess we're going to have to go raise more money now. And then you're sort of on this needle of like, do we get to go? Do we not? Do we get to go? But we have to go because otherwise our stories, we're not fulfilling our mandate. So things like that were really interesting.
I saw that fundraising link. Are you still raising money right now at this moment?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, we've got an impact campaign.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. So, I mean, we're still doing a lot of stuff, and we're going to probably follow up the film itself with a podcast. So maybe when we have the podcast, we can come back on your podcast and talk about the podcast, because it's going to hopefully be drilling in even deeper to some of the dark secrets and stories of the plastics industry.
Well, I imagine that the podcast comes out of you not being able to include everything. You sort of mentioned that there was a lot that got taken out. Was there something you were fighting for, but you'll get to discuss it later in a podcast form, or?
Yeah. So, when you've only got 82 minutes, you can't say everything that you want to say. But I think there certainly were some things that ended up on the sort of cutting room floor, as it were. And one of the things that I really wanted to be able to delve into a little more deeply is plastics in the food chain. People are afraid of using saran wrap at the end of the day or whatever, sushi, their food comes in this sort of styrofoam or plastic packaging. And sure, that's not a great thing. And also, please don't microwave your food in plastic. It is awful, awful. If you knew how much was leaching into your food, you would never do it. But what's scarier than that is what happens well before the food ever touches your plate. Because in terms of the largest intentional spread of microplastics in the world, that's fertilizers and pesticides, because they actually spray all those fertilizers and pesticides inside little microplastic pellets. They do that because it offers a sort of slow release of the fertilizers and pesticides. So you've got all those microplastics that are in the soil. Then you've got the irrigation water, which also already is, filled with microplastics as it is. Then what they're putting also onto the fields is sewage sludge, right? That's a form of fertilizer as well. So whether it's coming from animals or human beings or what's left in the drains, which is a whole bunch of microplastics from the products we use, that is also one of the greatest sources of microplastics, really, in Europe. They've done studies. So think about it. You're spreading that on. You've got the water. You've got the fertilizers and pesticides that are coated in microplastics. And then you've got this plastic mulch that you grow all the vegetables on the farm fields with. We actually show that in the film, these big, long plastic sheets, right, to create more heat. It's almost like a greenhouse kind of effects of the plants. And that just disintegrates into the ground. So all those sources. And that's just when you're growing your food, let alone the rainwater, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're looking at the food on your plate and it's coming in a plastics container, just realize it's inundated with plastics well before that.
Wow, I'm just thinking about Jan interviewing you about this stuff. You guys are going to need 3 hours.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
We'll make sure that we block off the half hour.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jan's so hilarious and she's such a dedicated activist.
It's Sarah Burke here, the host of the Women in Media podcast and the founder of the Women in Media Network. Yep, now there's an entire network. I've been working really hard to get things off the ground. And what would I do without coffee? I can barely function without it. But I feel much better about putting a coffee that's full of superfoods in my body. I've been loving the Focus Fuel instant mushroom coffee from Organic Traditions. And of course, all the ingredients are organic. It's packed with lion's mane mushroom to support memory, focus, and cognitive function, adaptogens to nourish your brain, and MCT powder to boost your energy and improve mental clarity. And before you make that face, no, it doesn't taste like mushrooms. It tastes like coffee. Actually better than most. There are hints of cinnamon and vanilla, and it is absolutely delicious. Did I mention it also just won Best New Mushroom Enhanced Beverage in a 2024 BrandSpark survey? Want to try the Focus Fuel mushroom coffee yourself? Head to organictraditions.com and use the promo code WomenInMedia20 for 20% off at checkout. And by the way, that applies for the entire site, not just the coffee. You're welcome. Just add water and get at it.
Hello, I'm Wendy Mesley.
There you are. A lot of people have wondered what happened to you.
I could say the same about you, Maureen Holloway.
Well, here we are, a few years after we left our previous jobs. We've been busy.
We have a podcast. I know, you're thinking who doesn't, but ours is really good. It's called Women of Ill Repute.
We don't just talk to women, though, just the most interesting people you'd ever want to meet.
Artists, musicians, comedians, doctors,
activists, convicts, writers, sex workers.
Drop some names.
Jan Arden, Pamela Anderson, Bruce Coburn,
Samantha Irby, Louise Penny, Marilyn Dennis, Colin Mockery.
We laugh, we cry, sometimes we argue. Come and find us.
Our website is womenofillrepute.com.
Or try Apple, Spotify, and all the podcast places.
So now you know what happened to us. Women of Ill Repute.
So being back in the spotlight, I don't know if I'm reading this right, but it feels like you were kind of out of the spotlight for a couple years and you're coming back in now. You are starring in the documentary. So how's being back in the public spotlight?
I don't really think about those things. I've spent so much time in TV, I've been doing press lately and just thinking about the fact that, I did this every single day. So
Yeah.
to not have to do it every single day is absolutely fine with me, but it's really great. I mean, it's been fun because I'm going back
Yeah.
into CTV and seeing all my old friends and pals and colleagues and all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. But it's different. It's different working on long form work like books and films or things that
Yes.
take a little bit of time. So you have to take time out of, being on camera every single day to do this long work. But I have to be honest with you, there's something actually that I didn't realize, because as I said, I never intended to be a director. There's nowhere, like, you can ask my friends, at no point did I say, this is like a dream of mine. But what I'm
Yeah.
realizing is you can tell stories that you can't on TV. Because at the end of the day, on TV, you've got to talk to your executive producers. There's advertising on television. You're limited in what you can say.
Yeah.
You have a short period of time to say what you want to say. And in film and in books, God, you get to rage against the machine in a way that like is so much more liberating and so much more freeing. So yeah, the trade-off is absolutely worth it, I think. Absolutely worth it.
Yeah, and I mean, we have definitely talked about this in the past on other podcasts, but the science trolls are really like the only thing that stands in the way, and they hardly stand in the way for someone like you. But with so much misinformation about microplastics, but also about so many other things that touch, the work that you do, how do you handle that with people online who think everything you say is not true?
I honest to God have been blessed there because like somehow or other, people who have followed me on Twitter, still refuse to
Yeah.
call it X, have been the most awesome people. Like I have I think
Yeah.
it's because, when I was at Daily Planet, people who watch Daily Planet were smart. Like I've always had a smart audience and I've had smart followers. So it's
There you go.
incredibly rare that this happens. It happened actually for the first time the other day. And it was because I bothered to respond to somebody who had a really controversial take with a large following, and then all those people decided to, all the ones with like the weird Twitter names like 0294721 Trump MAGA flag flag flag. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm just not going to do that anymore
Yeah.
because, but
Yeah.
for the most part, people have been really thoughtful. We spoke with the world's leading experts when it came to microplastics and really vetted this very rigorously for the science. So,
Yeah.
and here's the one thing. Plastics isn't super polarizing. Oil and gas and, climate change, and even whether or not the world is round, sadly, is a little bit more polarizing.
Yeah.
But just about everybody goes, garbage is bad. Plastic is bad. And
Yeah.
when you start to see garbage in your own body, probably bad. So I don't feel like, on the left and right, people are actually arguing. Most people have, we grew up in that
Good.
litter
Yeah.
bug generation. But
Yeah. Yeah.
even then we would have never expected that all that litter would be inside of our own bodies and our organs and our blood vessels and babies. Yeah.
Okay. So because this is the Women in Media podcast, I'm always interested in, how your experience might differ from someone who is not a woman.
Right.
I'm just wondering, like, if you can reflect in your career a little bit. Of course, leading up to, your directorial debut here too. Was there a moment that you were very proud to stand up for yourself as a woman and maybe talk yourself out of a situation where someone was looking down on you in some way or talking down to you?
It's funny because a male journalist, actually, when my book came out, a very well-known one, whom I won't name, who I have respect for,
Yeah, yeah.
after he read my book, he said, "I'll never underestimate you again." And I thought, why did you underestimate me in the first place? Which was kind of weird, but I get it. I know it was a compliment and it was meant as a compliment, but also you sort of think, ugh. And at the same
Yeah.
time, keep in mind, as a female science host, I was the only female science host for years, and remain so really still in broadcast in this country. So it
So
was
true.
mostly I've always been in forums where it's just been me and a whole bunch of dudes. And
Yeah.
but I will tell you the thing that irks me the most.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
And, I've said this to my male co-hosts, and I've had, whether it's been Jay Ingram or even Neil deGrasse Tyson was the host when I was at NOVA, or, whether it was Wired, whether it was Dan. If you Google their name, what comes up is their work, right? If you Google my name, thank God, not as much as before, but tons of porn links show up, right? Like, obviously, all
Ugh.
fake porn things, but it's like your name gets tagged in really weird arenas. And so I've often said to them, none of you guys have to deal with this. None of you have to deal with, people talking about what you're wearing on camera or any of those sorts of things. When I was at Daily Planet, I was like, can I just wear a uniform? Like, I don't want to wear a different outfit every day. I want to just be like David Attenborough.
You want it to be about the work, not about what you're wearing.
I just want, I don't need people commenting on what I'm wearing. And I remember, I used to get in trouble for, ridiculous things. Like, I wore the same boots on Daily Planet for over 2 years. And people used to write in and be like, can she please change her boots? But what I was doing is I was getting them reheeled at like a cobbler, right? Like I was just, trying to actually practice what I preach and wear the same shit all the time or whatever, right? Like make things last.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, you're actually confronting most of our pop culture values. You have to constantly be throwing things out and dressing anew, which is part of the problem, bringing it back to plastics. If you think about it, you've probably seen some of those images in Chile and Africa where we just dump all our clothes. So all the stuff that is this fast fashion stuff, people don't realize. And that's why I'm so angry with the wide pant leg trend. I'm angry with it. I'm angry with it because I know that it's just another, after the pandemic, they were like, oh, what are we going to do? We're going to change it from skinny jeans to wide pants. So I don't have any, but my mom loaned me a pair and I accept her pair that I'm going to borrow from her. I'll wear those, but that's about it, because that's all plastic.
It feels like the fast fashion trend actually it got worse, I find, in the last year. Having someone like you on the show, it's great to ask for like a takeaway that, someone can implement in their daily lives. And I will start with saying one I remember, which I'm sure you're still talking about, is putting your laundry on a delicate cycle.
Amazing that you remember that. Yeah, because for me, that was the simplest thing, right? Like, it's shocking that basically if you just turn the to delicate cycle, as you're saying, a gentle spin instead of regular or normal wash, you reduce microplastics in your washing machine load, the output by 70%. That's huge. That is huge. So, if we can get the manufacturers at the mills to do the same thing, that will have a huge impact on the amount of microplastics from clothing that we put out into the world.
And I guess while the wide leg pant leg is back, thrifting is too, which is a good sign.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Thanks, Sarah. I will take you up on that. Yeah, exactly. But those are like the weird, like when you start seeing me twitching with anger, it's like weird little things like that because you know that it's it's orchestrated,
Yeah, for sure.
It's big plastic.
What about up and coming females in the space? Have you found that you have had a chance to mentor any like upcoming science journalists or people, young people showing an interest, the next generation of people that will do what you do?
I wouldn't say mentor in any way because I would say the mentor is actually her dad. So David Suzuki's daughter, Sarika, is hosting CBC now, right? The Nature of Things.
Yeah.
She's phenomenal. She's great. And she's actually going to be hosting the and this isn't, I know you didn't plan this, but happens to be the case that Plastic People is going to be on the Nature of Things and she's hosting that. So we get a chance to interact together. And, she's also Eurasian and also, a female science host, brilliant, smart, funny, super engaging. Yeah. And so seeing that, like I did look at her and I was like, oh, I feel like I'm looking a little bit at myself in a way. And so, that was really wonderful. And so I'm thrilled that she's doing that. And obviously having...
How old is she?
I don't know how old she is. She's got kids. And obviously she's got like a mega champion in her dad. Apple doesn't fall far from the brilliance tree in that family. Sarika Suzuki and her sister is Severn. And Severn is heading up the David Suzuki Foundation now. So, yeah.
What's it like being around a family like that? I mean... You've had a few chances to be around those people, obviously.
Oh, yeah. Like David's a friend and he's just super. And incredibly supportive in a way that is, I just want to be like that for people in the future as well. Like just haul ass to come to my event. He's not even in town. I was like, David, you're in your 80s. Like, don't worry about it. I'll send you a screener. But yeah, he's just been really wonderful. Elizabeth May has been incredibly supportive all these years. We've just got really wonderful leading folks here in especially Vancouver and BC. Yeah. But I think we all got to stick together. The people who are doing this activist science work. know how hard it is.
Yes.
Well, we know how hard it is to get on TV. And we know how hard it is to, and then you wonder, okay, why are there environmental crises and problems? Well, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of gatekeepers and they'd rather just spoon feed people entertainment, and dumb down stuff, unfortunately. So at the end of the day, it's great that we've had this revolution in some ways, where we get people like you doing podcasts and you have a lot of control over your content. And, whenever I've been on Jan's podcast, I get to say whatever the hell I want.
Same goes for the upcoming.
Yeah, exactly. And that freedom is something that is terrific. That said, I think mainstream media gets a lot of flack because it's not that what the mainstream journalists are reporting on is inaccurate. I have full respect for so many of my friends who are journalists and doing that work day to day. They're reporting what they are, but it's the frame is small. So you get assigned a certain kind of story, and it's exactly like, Overton's window, right? You only get to talk within a small arena. And if you don't get to talk outside of that arena, well, then you're missing the big picture in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And that framing, how it is framed, is, of course, forced on you by these systems. And so it's
look at a
more
show.
and more limited each
Look
time.
at a show like The View. It looks like they're actually having disagreements or challenging discussions, but you've never actually seen anybody from the radical left on The View ever. It's literally the same conversation day after day between Democrats and Republicans, and they disagree, and it doesn't go anywhere. It's just kind of like talking head entertainment. So I'm pushing for people to be able to actually speak truth to power a little bit more, but they don't like that.
I love it. Huge congratulations on all the work you've been doing, because I know it's like such a large feat, the type of project that you just pulled into a documentary, and it's not easy work to do. You're doing this work for all humans. So I commend you.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot.
I don't know if you know how I end this podcast, but I usually ask my guests to nominate a few women that you would love to hear speak and tell their stories on this podcast, just women you admire in the media.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you and Caitlin are already doing this stuff, and Jan's already doing this stuff. But I would say Sarika. Who's on the nature of things.
I would love to interview
She would be
her.
perfect for this. Tell her I tagged her. She's it now. Poor girl's going to have to talk about plastic people again. No, I'm kidding. No, I did it.
You planned
No, I didn't. I'm totally joking. But she would be terrific for it. Yeah.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. And I can't wait to see you and celebrate you in person.
Big hug to you when I see you in Toronto. Thanks so much, Sarah.
You will find more information about this very important documentary, Plastic People, in the show notes and at womeninmedia.ca. Congrats again to Ziya Tong, making her directorial debut alongside her co-director, Rick Smith, for this one. They do have an impact campaign they could still use your support on. I've linked that in the show notes. You will find all the Canadian screening dates so far. If you want to host your own screening of the documentary, there's a link in there for that as well. If there is one takeaway from today, it is this. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not a problem. Thank you so much for listening.
I'm Debbie Travis.
And I'm Tommy Smythe.
And this is Trust Me, I'm a Decorator.
We're now podcasters. And why did we call it that? Well, you know us as decorators, but we've got lots more to share. We want to talk about travel and relationships. We're going to have amazing guests on.
Guests who inspire us for sure. We'll probably talk about design too. And of course, Tommy, don't forget about food.
Oh my gosh, how did I forget about food?
So please follow or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or as they say, wherever you get your podcast. And we'll pop right up when we have a new episode.
Wish us luck.
This podcast is distributed by the Women in Media Podcast Network. Find out more at womeninmedia.network.